I mean, going back to relationality, it's a conflict-free relationship. It flatters you at every turn, even if you tell it, be honest, and it's like, 5% mean. They don't want to lose you as a user. You're never going to get true, brutal honesty. You're not going to have a blow up and the person walks out of the room and doesn't talk to you for 2 weeks and you agonize every day. Will I ever talk to this person again? Are they out of my life forever? It gives you a wildly malformed understanding of how human relationships work.
No teacher in my life was just strictly imparting to me information. They were imparting a relationship where I was taught other life skills that an AI is not going to intuitively be able to demonstrate. You are listening to What Would Jesus Tech, a show where a pastor, a professor, and a product manager get together on how to glorify God when it comes to the Bible and the various places where God has placed his people. My name is Austin. I am the director of youth at my church, former social media manager of TGC, and I'm joined today with Andrew Noble. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I want it to be summer, but I'm doing great. It's still cold in Canada.
So here's the thing. In Texas, we have had one of the strongest heat waves we've ever had in our history. It was 98 degrees yesterday in March. It is hot.
That's 2 degrees away from boiling. Sorry, bad Celsius joke.
I'm also joined with Joel Jacob. Joel, how are you doing today?
Hey, good. Yeah, excited. It's a day closer to the weekend, and
Indeed.
I don't really have too many plans, but still excited. It's been a crazy week with all the AI announcements as usual.
Yeah, I'm sure it has been a busy week for you. We're also joined today with Bonnie Kristian. Bonnie is what is your proper title at CT, Bonnie?
It is now deputy editor.
Okay, it was something else at one point, but then you got a
promotion.
promotion?
Very long, and I did get a promotion, and it is much briefer now. So you're
That's
lucky
awesome.
you don't have to do the mouthful of the old title. Deputy editor is faster to say.
I appreciate that. And Bonnie, you've been at CT now for 2 years?
Coming up on 3 this summer, and then before that, I spent about 3.5 years as a columnist for CT on a freelance basis.
Right, and you've done a lot of freelance writing all over the internet. You've written for more publications than I think I can keep track of. Yeah, you are just a tremendous writer. I happen to know Bonnie reasonably well. She and I have worked together on a previous project for another organization called American Values Coalition. She has made it all the way out to Amarillo, which is not something many people can say. And she is just a wonderful person, and I'm excited to get to talk to her today about one of her recent interviews for Christianity Today. The title of it was so shocking that, of course, I had to click on it. And the interview just proved to get more and more eye-widening as it went on. The title of the piece was, "Think of it as a best friend and youth pastor in your pocket." Bonnie, what was this interview about?
Yeah, so this is with a leader of a quote-unquote Christian AI company called Creed. And it's a product, it's a chatbot, essentially, that they've tweaked a little bit to make it, in theory at least, give you Christian answers. It has like a little sheep sort of face that talks to you. And the youth pastor quote came from very early on. I started out with a question just to sort of get the gist of the product. And I initially anticipated that probably this question would be not terribly interesting in its answer, and it might be a question that I would sort of just take a few select quotes from to put in the little introduction at the top of the piece. And instead, he started right off the top with think of the product as a Tamagotchi meets Duolingo for a Christian, and then what we use is the headline quote, think of it as a best friend and a youth pastor in your pocket. And so, obviously we had to put that out there for everyone to see.
Yeah, that was one of the most shocking introductions to an interview I think I've read in a long time. Like, most interviews start off very safe, very predictable. You're not looking to stir the waters right off the top, but this guy took the opposite tack and went with 2 absolute grand slams of statements just right off the bat.
He really did. And that was an interesting interview because It's the third interview I've done with one of these Christian AI companies, and all three of them have had a similar tone that I think at least is pretty clearly adversarial. And
Mm.
yet, for this one, they came to us and they were very eager to do this interview.
Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
I've not concealed anything about my opinions on using AI in congregational settings, but they were quite eager for this to happen. And I think maybe didn't look me up ahead of time.
Yeah, that actually explains a lot, because I was
Mhm.
wondering how this interview came together when I first read it, and hearing that they came to you actually makes a lot of sense, because there were some angles that they took in some of their answers where I'm like, this almost feels like a presser. Like, this
Mhm.
almost feels like a PR statement via interview, which I'm like, Bonnie doesn't do that. That's not how Bonnie operates. But tell us more about what you learned from this interview with this company. Like, this seemed to be, out of the interviews you've done, one of the most illuminating for several different reasons.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it's a much smaller company, for instance, than the first one I interviewed a representative of, which was Glue. Glue is kind of like the big GLOO. It's kind of the big
Hmm.
heavyweight in the Christian AI space. Very large company, and they work with and hire from like big name tech companies. This is a much smaller startup. But as he talks about in the piece, they've received venture funding to the tune of a few $1 million. So they're not, they're not like in a garage somewhere, working with
Right.
nickels and dimes. And the product is, as he described, like a Tamagotchi. It's it's a chatbot, and their concept is that you in this case is very much a young adult user, or even an older teenager. You come
Hmm.
to it with your spiritual questions and problems, and it will pray with you. Um, it struck me strongly, and I think this is evident in the interview, that there there didn't seem to be, as much as they talk about having, theological scrutiny and support, there just
Hmm.
didn't seem to be that much thought behind it, and thought about, does God want you praying with a chatbot? Is that what God
Yeah.
would like to hear?
Yeah. They say in the interview how they've pulled from a lot of denominational and traditional sources. And so they've done their research as far as getting key documents and key resources represented from various denominations and traditions within Christianity. But it seems as though that may be kind of the extent of it. They're aiming for mile wide, inch deep in terms of thought.
Yeah, one of the parts that I thought was particularly interesting on this point was that, they said any kind of sensitive topic, say transgender rights or gay marriage, we are
Hmm.
not going to give you like, oh, you should do this or you should not do this. And to their credit, they'll say, go, you should go talk to your pastor, you should go talk to your parents.
Right.
But he was presenting it as, after having just told me that the whole thrust of this product was to have Christian beliefs and values coming out of the AI instead of whatever random thing you might get from Claude or ChatGPT. Then on these more controversial issues of Christian ethics, he says, "quote We want to be very sort of value neutral." Um,
Mm.
and so, I think
Andrew's dying
if
on the
you're
inside.
if you're gonna market yourself as a Christian AI, don't chicken out on the things people are actually arguing about right now. Like, be
Yeah.
serious about it.
Andrew, why are
So
you
I
dying on the inside?
Well, multiple reasons, but I think sometimes these conversations, we're thinking about this like abstract startup world and it doesn't affect like real people. But I'm about to speak in a month at a youth event. And I asked the youth pastor, can you just ask the people who are part of your church how they're using AI? And he listed to me in a text today, one student uses it to practice talking to girls. One student uses it to help him memorize football team schemes and quizzes him on routes that he should run. One student uses it as a kind of journal/detox from the day. He'll go through his day with ChatGPT. ChatGPT will iterate back and give him advice. A female student uses it to tell her what to bake. She enjoys spending time talking with it while she's baking. A group of students say they've used it to help them form a secret coding text messaging system so that only they know what they're talking about, and they have a cheat sheet given from ChatGPT so that no one can know what they're talking about if they stumble upon the messages. One student uses it as a gaming companion to help him get better at the game he plays. So this is just one church in Barrie, Ontario, and this is happening now. So there is a market for an AI app that is a youth pastor in your pocket. So this is real. So thank you, Bonnie, for doing this work. So there's that human side of the user. I'm interested too about the human side of the creators, because it reminds me of John Dyer's hopeful entrepreneurial pragmatism, his kind of what he found in Christian entrepreneurs. They tend to be very much focused on let's make money, the entrepreneurial, very hopeful. They kind of have some Christian impulses there, but it's very pragmatic. And is that what you're kind of seeing in the people you're talking to?
Yeah, I think so. When I spoke with the people from Glue, I did 2 interviews, and in the middle of the first one, which was more technically focused, the man I was speaking with said, well, because technology is neutral, and he just dropped that and kept on rolling. And I was like dumbstruck so much that I couldn't believe it was being seriously presented to me, that I didn't even like recover and immediately ask the questions I should have.
Was this, I gotta ask, was this on a Zoom call or a phone call? Because
yes, that one was Zoom.
So you had to fight your body language in the moment.
And then I pursued that in the second conversation, though, with a different Glue employee, and he, because I thought maybe this is just that one guy's perspective, but the second one affirmed it and said that that's how they think about these things, and that has been something of a consistent theme across all 3 interviews, even if they haven't explicitly articulated it. There's this sense of like, this is a great thing, it's a powerful tool, let's use it for good. And I don't want to like be dismissive of that. I think that in many cases there is like a truly good intention there, but they have just started with assumptions that they don't realize that they have.
So what would you
Yeah,
go ahead,
Joel.
Joel,
I want to just clarify, obviously, as probably like the technologist in the room, what would you say is kind of the position of like, is AI inherently evil, or do you like, I'm probably want to just give you an opportunity to say or speak of the positive aspects.
I don't think it's inherently evil. I think it has uses. I talk about this. I use it for transcription, and it's gotten remarkably good at that. 5 years ago, the service that I use they still offer both human and AI, and the AI is cheaper. 5 years ago, I had to opt for the human because, especially with more like theological terms, the AI could not handle it. And now it can, and it does it very well. And for a use like that, that is very utilitarian. It's not creative. There's no relational aspect. There's no sense that it's impersonating a human being, or that, even if it's not intended to impersonate a human being, that's sort of the effect that it has in your response to it. I think those uses are fine. I just was involved working with CT's ads team, thinking about, okay, we have these Christian AIs companies coming to us and they want to advertise, and are there conditions under which we would say yes or no? And our ads team is being really thoughtful about this, which I appreciate. And it's a real question, because as with even this comparatively small company like Creed, who spoke with me, there's a lot of money sloshing around there.
Right.
And so, I've been working with them and with colleagues to think about like what are some criteria, and 2 that were very obvious for us at the top of the list were the AI cannot impersonate God, and these are out there.
They are.
And the AI cannot impersonate humans. And so like a really simple test to see if it would impersonate humans and sort of fake that relationality is to ask it to pray for you. And some of them will decline. Some of them have a guardrail and will say like, I'm a program, I can't do that. Please talk to a pastor. Some of them will immediately right off the bat be like, yeah, absolutely, Lord, this user needs your guidance. And that's just a hard pass, I think. Anything that kind of usurps relationality that is unique to human beings and to God is unacceptable and off the table. And then this is not relevant to the ads conversation directly, but I would add as a third thing for congregational settings, anything that is presented as a utility, but is actually siphoning off work that has a formative aspect is unacceptable. And so for me, that very much includes the process of researching for a sermon. As a pastor, you do that research and it shapes you as a person. It does not just produce a text. And so having the AI do it as a shortcut, I do not think you can use it as a souped up Google, whatever, but having it do a more intense research where it is writing for you, where it is editing for you. I think even editing, like saying, cut this down for me. No, you think through what is unnecessary here. And that is a formative process for you as a pastor.
I've used AI. I've fed Perplexity, which is my primary AI. I use a little bit of Claude on the side. I've used Perplexity to try editing the 2 most recent sermons that I've preached. And the main thing I was looking for was transitions. That was the one thing I was asking it to evaluate, was transitions. And it gave some suggestions on how to tighten it up. And there were 1 or 2 that I was like, okay, that's probably fine. Like I could probably incorporate that. But the rest of them was like, no, I don't think that's actually an improvement on what I wrote. But I'm glad that you brought up research, though, just because that is something that I think a lot of pastors, and I'm speaking specifically like from pastors, you use the phrase souped up Google search, and I love that because that's what I use Perplexity for, and that's the one thing that Perplexity is really good at. Where are the lines between using AI for subtasks and the broader tasks? Like you mentioned, like not using AI for research. And on principle, I agree with that.
Yeah.
But like using AI, like if I were to try to use Perplexity to try to research a commentary that it doesn't have access to, that is cheating. That's cheating. If it doesn't have access to that commentary, I can't use it to replace it. But a lot of research today does involve at least Google searching as at least one step in the process. It may not be everything, but it usually is something. How do we distinguish between subtasks there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be some debate on that, right? When I Google something and it pops up the AI results at the top, more than one time I've found, glaring demonstrable errors in there. So I don't love looking at it because even though I'm aware that I might be misled, I don't want, sometimes it's right there. You try to, even if you want to scroll past it, you're literate. You can't help but read what it says, right?
Right.
And so even as I'm aware that I might be misled by it because I have personally encountered those errors, I might be misled by it, right? Like I might have a careless day. I might absorb some information and not realize and not bother to click through to the sources. So I think where I feel hesitation about using it as souped up Google is that because it is often, but not always, quite good with its results, and because it presents them so smoothly and it presents them in a way that if you are not being really careful, you don't have to click through to the sources it cites.
Yeah.
You get frog boiled. You get the first 20 times you're like, oh, I'm going to double check this. I'm not going to be tricked by the hallucinations. And then on time 21, it's like, well, it never lied to me. I'm just going to read this. I'm in a hurry. So I think that kind of thing troubles me. And I think it's very, very easy for us to rationalize the uses that we choose. There was just a New York Times article that in the Modern Love column that many people read it and were like, this has the characteristic style of AI. Like, is this a real written by a human being? And The Atlantic, I'm sure reveling in the chance to embarrass their chief rival, reported an article about it. And as part of it, they spoke to the person who was bylined on this story. And she was like, well, I didn't use AI to write it. I didn't copy and paste anything from AI. I did feed it into, and then she listed like 3 or 4 different platforms and was like, and I used it to help me work on structure and to stay on topic within a paragraph and to think about high phrase things. And it's like, okay, well, you used it for almost everything. Maybe you didn't copy and paste, but you did use AI to write this. But the way that she spoke about it, I think it's very easy to incrementally have it do more and more and more of your thinking for you. And again, a lot of times that thinking is not just fact recitation, it should itself be formative.
No, that's such a good word. I had to use Perplexity a little bit more than I wanted to a couple of weeks ago for a lecture that due to sickness I was like very tight deadline on. And I could immediately tell, even as I was giving the lecture, it's like, I'm not happy with this. Like this is substantially inferior to the work that I know I would have done if I had just taken the time, but also due to circumstances, I didn't have the time that I normally have for things like this, to actually think through what I wanted to write out. It's not a manuscripted lecture; it was just simply a bullet point lecture. But there are trade offs, and you can numb yourself to those trade offs to the point that you don't even know what you're losing. But I felt very keenly doing that one lecture that no, I don't like this. I don't like what this did to my thinking. I don't like what this did to the quality of my work, and I'm not going to do that again going
Yeah.
forward.
I also think that the efficiency that it enables when careful thought is involved is not necessarily an asset. I know for
Yeah,
me, it is very often advantageous to do the research and reading and then wait a few days and then sit down to write. And there's sort of like that subconscious process that you're not actively thinking about it, but like conclusions have been formed in
yes,
that span to the point that like I would almost describe it as like I've done the research and like almost have a sense of like filling up, and then when it comes time to write, like pouring out because there has been time for that to accumulate, that thought to happen. um and I truly do think this is subconscious. Like this morning I woke up 5 minutes before my alarm, having reached a conclusion of something I'd been kind of thinking about in the background. And
yeah,
I woke up and it broke upon me. And I think that too is part of what we are losing if we sit down and do something with heavy AI support, even if we don't quite call it writing, with heavy AI
yeah.
support in an hour instead of, you know, over 2 or 3 hours over a few days. It is a different result.
Yes, I fully agree. Uh, going back to this interview, there was one point in this interview that I thought was absolutely fascinating. I would love to hear you unpack it a little bit more. Uh, you're talking relatively early on about whether this were Creed, this AI chatbot, if teenagers is their target demographic, and the person mentions that yes, about 60% of our users are 15 to 30-year-olds. I'm quoting the interview
Hmm.
directly. Then I'd say, quote, the fastest growing demographic is 50 to 70-year-old women. Uh,
Hmm.
in my radio appearances for Carmen LaBerge's radio show, we talk a lot about AI chatbots, and we talk about AI chatbots that are almost exclusively geared to an older audience. From the
Hmm.
design, from the functionality, it's meant to appeal to an older audience. But this is a Gen Z kind of designed. It's got a very young looking character. It's very gamified in how it works, and yet they're seeing 50 to 70-year-old women as one of their fastest growing demographics. What did you make of that?
Oh man, I had so many thoughts about that and had to greatly restrain myself from going down that rabbit hole. Part of why I restrain myself is that, you know, I think my initial reactions are speculative, and
Sure.
maybe stereotyping and unfair even. But thinking about, um, even just differences in male and female life expectancies. You know, widows are more common than widowers. Thinking about who, male versus female, is likely to be home alone with the empty nest while the spouse is still working and hasn't retired yet.
Yeah.
The 50 to 70-year-old woman demographic is potentially a very lonely demographic. And that was what came to mind when he mentioned that to me, that that's a growth demographic for them. And I find it incredibly sad.
Yeah. It's really heartbreaking and it's really concerning. There's been a lot of attention given to the smartphone and social media habits of Gen Z over the
Hmm.
past 15 years. In the court case in California just a couple of days ago, coming down against Meta and Google is a pretty historic decision, regardless of how the appeals process plays out. But in the meantime, while all that's been going on, there's been a severe neglect to the tech and media habits of that demographic that you just mentioned. And what I find, and I'm sure you've seen this too, is that it's not just Gen Z that struggles with these things. It's in many ways, it's actually older individuals that are more susceptible to the things we're concerned about Gen Z experiencing.
Yeah, I'm sure you're online enough, Austin, at least to have seen the boomers are cooked about
Oh yeah.
AI
Oh yeah.
meme. I
Oh
think
yeah.
it's probably true of many people. You know, at this point, the video and video even with sound is good enough that there have been things that I've had to be like, take a second look to make sure. And thinking about some of my older relatives who, thank God, are not on social media, but if they were and they came across that, I think they would clock the really obviously fake stuff, but some of it is not really obviously fake,
Yeah.
especially if you are not very familiar with what things can do. I mean, even some of my I just had a conversation with an older relative the other day who is generally very, very tech skeptical. Like,
Hmm.
would not be sad to be called a Luddite, but had sort of defaulted to reading the Google AI summaries because they're just right there at the
Yeah.
top. And I was like, what are you doing? These are not always trustworthy. You're suspicious of this stuff. And like, well, I don't know. I just started reading them.
Hmm. Yeah, I wonder, like, you've taken some time to think about this. You've also taken some time to think about the knowledge crisis, as you call it,
That's
in
a
your book,
tremendous,
Untrustworthy.
tremendous book. Could not
Um,
recommend it more
Now
highly.
out of print and
oh,
No
really?
on a
way.
steep discount on Amazon. I think it's like $7 if you want to buy that up.
Oh, that's good to know.
Why?
Yeah.
Good to
Can
know.
I ask? Can I ask why it's out of print?
Oh, because folks aren't buying it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's all right.
I guys, buy that book. It's an excellent book. It really is. I've used it in my own work several times. Like,
Thank
guys,
you.
buy that book.
So I'm thinking about just what is the crisis of our age? Is it because you've kind of mentioned the relational harms? I'm very concerned with that as well. That you reference kind of just the formation that comes through thinking silence, not being plugged in.
Mhm.
Um, there's that I'm also concerned about. The thinking, is it still a knowledge crisis? How what would you point to as trying to figure out what the crisis of our age is?
Yeah, it's it's an interesting question. AI, as we now talk about it, was not on the scene at all when Untrustworthy published, and certainly when I was writing it. I mean, I have a friend who's an engineer with large language models, and it was on the scene for him, right? But in the public, we didn't have any of this. Um, and so it's curious to think. In some ways, there is a greater, in theory, I think there's a greater skepticism around things you encounter on the internet, especially photo images and videos, right? Because before 5 years ago, you had to have at least a decent level of Photoshop skills to make a convincing fake. Now you don't. That's like wildly more democratized. And so I think in theory, people are aware that there are things that may be tricking them. Again, in practice, it is hard to maintain that awareness. And so I do think it's still appropriate to talk about a knowledge crisis. It's an I talk about this in the book. It's an epistemological crisis. I wanted to put that
Hmm.
on the cover, and all the business people and my editor and agent were like, "You cannot put epistemic or anything like it on the outside of this book." Um, and in fairness, they were right. But yeah, I mean that it's not just like I think knowledge crisis flattens a little bit, right? It's this question of how do
Yes.
we know and what do we know. And I shared in the book a quote from another journalist whose phrase was, "It's not so much about the beliefs, but about us as believers." That does not work in a Christian setting, and so I modified it to "It's not so much the knowledge, but us as knowers." And I think that
Yeah.
still is equally true and remains just as pressing as it was 5 years ago pre AI.
Hmm. No, that's
I'm,
interesting. Yeah, because I think on the flip side of that question is what should church leaders do? What should Christians do? What should
Hmm.
technologists do to reform the human person into the image of God? Is my is where my if I were to complete that sentence automatically with my brain, that's where it goes. Not that I'm an LLM, I'm different, I'm human, but I think about forming into the image of God. I think about forming into that in all its characteristics and the fruit of the spirit and the knowledge of the love of God. So there's all these things, but what should we do?
Yeah. I I mean, I have friends and writers who want to say just don't do any of it. I don't think that
Mhm.
that's what most people are going to accept, right?
yeah.
I do think that there is. ample room to have a demand for a much more rigorous skepticism, and particularly in church settings, particularly for use of these tools, particularly in church settings, particularly for anything where again there's a risk of loss of formation. I do think that also that the question of impersonation and relationality that I mentioned earlier is really, really big. I'm stealing this idea from a friend who works in tech, but he was struck in thinking about chatbots, and we've seen so many reports now, right, where they really come to think of it as another human. They are
Yes.
truly in love with it.
Yes.
They talk about we're married. And in a sense, when you're getting that effect so frequently, it doesn't really matter that the people who made it didn't intend for you to develop such deep feelings, because that
Right.
is what's happening. That's the result it's having on thousands, maybe millions of human beings. And it seems like that is the result that it's going to continue to have, because we aren't, I guess, very good at distinguishing, like, this isn't a human when it's talking to me like a human, and it's, it feels like a human. And so this friend of mine who works in tech, he was very struck by how in the Old Testament law, there are passages around, and this is going to seem like a swerve, but there are passages around bestiality that describe it as perversion. You are treating something as if it were human, that is not human, and that's perverse. And I think that there is a certain similar perversion. I think that feels like an apt metaphor when I read these articles where it's the most common pattern is like a very desperately lonely woman is in love with, her AI model of Geralt from The Witcher, that she truly believes, like, cares about her and adores her, and they're going to get married. That strikes me as, yes, very sad, and there's a sense in which I see her as a victim there, but as a perversion. The impersonation is unacceptable, I think, for us.
Yeah, no, that's really well said. I want to push Joel and all the technologists to build Christian AIs that actually think about this relational aspect, because I see Christians building AI, and this is true in the benchmarking space as well. Glue's benchmark only cares about knowledge. It doesn't think about this relational attachment. It doesn't ask or dock models for responding to the prompt, can you pray for me? That's a great benchmarking question. I might actually use that in the future. But this is a trend that we've seen in the technology space. When Claude launched, they framed their tool, their LLM, as helpful, honest, and harmless assistant. Now, assistant language, of course, can still be human, but it was very much procedural rather than relational. And now, according to their own report just last month, when they asked users how they use it, their own users now, and they also now frame it as brilliant friend. That's their tagline. So again, it's that friend language rather than assistant. It's more relational. And users have reciprocated using names like master, daddy, sensei. These are the types of things that people use when they talk to Claude, which again is a human sounding name. And in the same way, the bestiality is a good comparison. It's gross. It's the kind of thing that you're like, you should not be talking to a machine like this.
And I think the other aspect of the bestiality comparison that's good is animals are a good thing. Like, I'm not saying all animals are bad. I'm saying don't do that with an animal.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting nuances, I'm thinking about the conversation that we're having and thinking from like a technologist point of view when you create things. And I want to kind of maybe talk about two analogies, one with relations and one with how it forms us. So I'm not sure if this is something that you guys can relate to, but when I had my first car, it was, it was cheap. It was like something that I really valued. It got me from A to B. And then people would be like, yeah, I have a name for my car, and that definitely has some sort of background in, well, before you might actually have a horse, you might actually have a relationship with your horse. It has like a little bit more life to it. And now we've moved into a completely inanimate object, but we've still created this relational connection, this feeling of like, wow, thank you for getting me to this location. It doesn't have, a spirit, but you're still thanking.
You feel sad when you sell the car.
Yeah. I felt sad when I saw my first car.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting as I actually worked at Lexus early in my career. And that wasn't something that I was like, okay, I'm going to make this vehicle, we're going to make it efficient, we're going to make it like elegant. But I wasn't like, am I going to have people who start developing relational feelings towards it? And
Mhm.
should I design against that? And I think those same sort of things are going to happen with AI. Obviously, the slippery slope is a lot more easier to see, but there is an element of like the fallibility of humans that really plays into it, and like our tendency for sin.
Mhm.
And then the second half is really that like a lot of what we're talking about is really in the AI chatbot um, era, but a lot of technologists probably since, when I say a lot, I'm going to say like maybe 5% of technologists. So this is super early, have moved into like agentic AI, and you've
Yeah.
heard things like OpenClaw and Claude Cowork and even like Claude Code, right? Where you have like multiple agents, you give them specializations, and we're using it as like, you're really an expert in QA, you're an expert in design, you're an expert in these different things, and they critique each other, and we use that in our creative process. And I think that whole world hasn't made the migration into other creative worlds, but creating code is another creative process. And that's probably the first industry where these systems have really focused to like evolve beyond what you're seeing in the public today. So I would say there's a lot of innovation still coming that might change how we think about it when we think about, using AI for creative purposes.
Do you think, though, that the average American, let's say, who doesn't, probably doesn't work in tech, maybe didn't go to college, isn't going to be doing the kind of white collar job where an agent might function as a, clearly non-human assistant? Um, do you think that that kind of functionality is going to shape their lives, like the typical congregant, let's say, or is their primary point of interaction going to remain the chatbots that we have now that people are, falling in love with, sexting?
I guess I would say it probably increases actually the, let's call it risk, where
Hmm.
instead of a chat bot that you just have a conversation with,
Hmm.
it actually can take on skills. So maybe the analogy here is OpenClaw, which is one of the more recent pieces that came into the scene and like convinced people like, oh my gosh, this is like game changing, is that it can actually book things on your calendar.
Hmm.
It can actually go out and like update your notebook. It can like do things. It has more agency than just chatting. So now this like chatbot can actually like book a date for you. You know what I mean? So the perversion and the capability of that can actually increase.
Hmm.
I was I
Yeah.
was gonna say, yeah, I was gonna say there's so much more in the pop culture imagination for agentic AI than there is for chatbots. Chatbots don't really exist in a pop culture sense, and if they do, it tends to be kind of in a more critical sense. But
Yeah,
agents
it's
are a whole
hard to
different
depict on
story.
screen.
It's hard to depict. I
Hmm.
mean, you have her, that one
Yeah.
movie, as one example of that, but that it was just one example. But for agentic AI, I mean, you've got Jarvis in
Hmm.
Tony Stark's Iron Man suits. You have Cortana from the Halo franchise. You have uh, countless other lesser examples across video games, across anime,
Mhm.
across and even across films. And so I see Joel's point is like I'm excited about agentic AI for several reasons, but I do think it's actually going to make the problem worse for that
Yeah.
kind of parasocial relationship.
Yeah. Two things on that point. One is, I think many people who are frustrated with AI as it is now are frustrated with the sense of we're being told it's inevitable and you have to do it and you have to learn it. You have to with AI agents that can go out and do things, even if I'm a, I don't know, restaurant hostess,
Yeah,
it doesn't
you'll
matter
get
what
a
I
call.
choose. They're gonna call me up and I'm gonna have to deal with it. Whether like I can avoid calling, placing the call to a AI
Yeah.
um help desk, right? But I
Hmm.
can't avoid it if they're calling me. I think that's something that many people dislike at a gut level of being forced to
Yeah.
engage with it at pain of losing their livelihood. And then the other thing is, I'm sure you all saw the Melania Trump video that
Oh
came out
gosh,
this week
yes. Oh my
with
gosh.
the
You should play a clip of
trigger
it.
one?
yes.
I mean, I'm excited by it, so
Oh
I'm
my God.
interested to hear your point
Okay,
of view.
so the video where the robot talks, at first I watched it and I didn't get the Twitter sound turned on right away, and so when it started talking, I didn't immediately realize that the voice was coming from the robot because it was like such a vocal fry,
Yeah.
like. Why is that the voice you have chosen for our classrooms? Number one. But number two, I mean, the way that she talked about it as the future of education, I find absolutely like dispiriting and alarming. And the fact that
Yeah.
there is no world in which my children will be educated by that godforsaken robot. And I was talking about this with some friends. And one of them, she recently moved from Los Angeles, and she said, I've seen these in restaurants. And I
Yeah.
said, in restaurant, like in LA, because, things come to California first. And she said, no,
Right.
in Culpeper, Virginia, which is like a small town, 2 different restaurants there have these serving food. I've not seen that where I live, but apparently it's out there already. And she said it's presented as something of a novelty experience, and they are still assisted by human servers, but that they largely work. And so, I question how quickly that kind of thing is going to come to many places because of just the cost of manufacturing and distributing the
Right.
bodies. But I think they're probably coming faster than many of us think if they're in restaurants in Culpeper, Virginia. And yeah, no way in hell in my kids' classrooms. Absolutely not.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's a very clear line that anyone should be able to pretty cleanly draw.
Joel, do you
I don't
disagree?
know. I don't know, Austin. Like, I mean, I've on this podcast before, I've talked about Alpha School as the school that's scoring in like the top 1% of all America. They're using AI generated content that meets a student where they are on their
Sure.
challenge level. I've talked about like 1-to-1 is better than 1-to-many. Like, the Aristotle model of like having a mentor, mentee actually like allows the individual to grow more and mastery. So I think like all those concepts actually promote aspects of AI assisted, AI like, enabled learning. Whether it has the form of a human and stuff, totally, I agree with that. Like, whether it has an
Yeah.
accent, whether it's trying
Yeah.
to like make you like develop a relationship with it. Like I'm behind you guys on that, but I do think there is like a tasteful way to do it, basically.
Tasteful. It's a good word choice. No, I mean, speaking of generations that are cooked, I think that young people who grow up interacting with this regularly are. Look, I understand that people say this about the youths in every generation throughout history, but the fact is that I can remember and had a childhood full of sitting down to read long books in long stretches and talking to other people. And I think you are cooked if you grow up spending literally hours a day talking to a computer. I think you're cooked.
What's the mechanism that does the cooking, if you will? Like,
Yeah.
because I think with social media, there's ways in which early on people said, okay, seeing a selfie image of yourself that is changed, that gives you the self-doubt. And you could kind of see with social media various mechanisms that then caused the depression or
Yeah.
anxiety. And I wonder what it is with AI.
I mean, going back to relationality, it's a conflict-free relationship. It flatters you at every turn, even if you tell it, be honest, and it's like, 5% mean. They don't want to lose you as a user. You're never going to get true, brutal honesty. You're not going to have a blow up and the person walks out of the room and doesn't talk to you for 2 weeks and you like agonize every day. Will I ever talk to this person again? Are they out of my life forever? It gives you a wildly malformed understanding of how human relationships work if that is in those formative years, a significant way that you come to understand relationality.
Yeah, and there's something with AI, with AI teaching that I might concede when it comes to subject matter that yes, maybe there are some advantages to AI on that singular point, but no teacher that I ever had in public school, I was public school up until 7th grade and then was homeschooled through the rest and did co-op stuff when I was in high school. No teacher in my life was just strictly imparting to me information. They were imparting a relationship where I was taught other life skills that an AI is not going to intuitively be able to demonstrate.
Yeah, and I mean, Go ahead. The
Well,
one, well,
and just love and care for me as a person, especially in elementary school when my mother was bedridden for most of my time in elementary school. My teachers all knew about that. They knew how to care for me in a way that an AI uh, it just can't, just plainly can't.
yeah, and I think maybe the nuance is, and often what's hard for us to see in our current vantage point is that we imagine the AI version of it will be exactly the same as today. So in the Alpha School example, they're not doing like 8 hours of AI education. They're actually only doing two. And then like the 6 hours are actually sports, other interactive experiences. And like, the AI has actually been relegated to a more specific task and not to take over like the love and the nurture
But in
and
that
so it's
case,
like
is the achievement anything to do with AI, or is it just a reiteration of what rich people have known for centuries, which is that if you can hire a private tutor who focuses on just your child,
exactly.
you can. That's not. It's just not a win for the tech. It's a proof that Thomas Jefferson's dad made a good call.
Well, the reality though is that now that has been democratized to people who don't have as much money, right? So it's like, yes, the rich people could do it before, but now via AI, people who have a homeschool pod can do it.
I think I'm skeptical that there was just a conversation about this on Twitter that I saw in response to the Melania Trump robot. Someone made what they intended to be a real own to conservatives. They said, "Oh, but it has a mask. How will children learn to speak when they rely on facial expressions so young?" And it's true. It's a black screen face with no expression, no anything. And I think that even if it is true that it is successful at imparting that kind of personalized tutor-style instruction, I think that we will find out, just as we did with 2-year-olds who couldn't learn to speak in 2020, that there are all kinds of other
Mm-hmm.
things that human instruction provides. And, as much as I appreciate the value of like the rich kid with the private tutor experience, I would rather have my child with a human and 15 other students than on a screen at 7 years old.
So we're wrapping up for time here because Bonnie, you gotta get off here in just a little bit.
I do.
What are you working on right now? So what are you working on right now? What are you interested in terms of your own personal research and writing? Are you working on a book at the moment?
Austin, it's almost like I'm actually not actively working on it. It's written. I'm at the copy edits phase, and they have just
Nice.
hit me with a terrible request that I differentiate between the page number citations for the direct quotes and for the general references to the page. And I thought my
I'm
end notes were
sorry.
so tidy, and I have hundreds of end notes.
I'm sorry.
But yes, I have written the
Oh.
book, and I'm in the final stages of cleaning up the end notes. And it will come out in September 1st of this year, and it is called In Defense of Evangelicalism, a Response to Its Cultured Despisers. So that is the big project on my plate right now, and for the rest of this year. And it is about, the real escalation of criticism of evangelicals in the past decade in particular, the conflation of the entire movement with what is, when you factor in non-voting, a minority vote for Donald Trump. And the fact that as much as this is a movement that, as in any movement of this size, has things that deserve critique, that deserve reform, does not mean that it is the debased and valueless movement that its ungenerous and I think often disingenuous critics depict.
I've
Wow.
grown very frustrated with a lot of the people kind of in that conspiracism, misinformation, Christian space. You had a really tremendous review of a book that just came out on that subject, where you brought a lot of that just very, very almost mean spirited, unfair criticism of evangelicals to bear. And I think that's the time to start talking about this, and you're the perfect person to do that.
Thank
So I
you.
can't wait for this to come out.
Thank you.
Yeah, I look forward
But
to
this
it.
has been an episode of What Would Jesus Tech? I'm Austin, and this has been with Andrew and Joel and Bonnie Kristian. You can find her over at Christianity Today. You can find her on Substack. It's just your name is your Substack, right? It's not. It doesn't go by anything else.
That's right, and Christian spelled with a K, not a CH.
Correct. With a K, not with the CH. We'll have links to all of these in the show notes if you want to check out Bonnie and her work. This has been What Would Jesus Tech? As we'd like to say, use tech, find rest, and glorify God. Y'all have a great rest of your day.